In 1949, the Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar was conducting systematic excavations at Eridu. His team had reached the lowest occupation level, the very first human settlement at the site. Below this level, there should have been nothing: virgin soil, untouched earth, the natural ground that existed before humans arrived. That's not what they found. Beneath the earliest temple, beneath the first evidence of human occupation, Safar's team broke through a sealed stone floor and discovered a subterranean chamber. Inside that chamber was a seat carved from a single block of black stone. The excavation records describe it simply: throne-like structure, basalt or similar, dimensions exceeding normal human proportions. Exceeding normal human proportions. The seat was too large for a human being to use comfortably. The armrests were too high. The depth of the seat was too great. Whoever, or whatever, this throne was built for was significantly larger than any person who has ever lived. And it was there before the first city was built. The Sumerians called Eridu the first city, not metaphorically, literally. Their own historical records, inscribed on clay tablets 4,000 years ago, state that kingship descended from heaven at Eridu. The first king ruled there. The first laws were established there. The first temple was built there. Modern archaeology has confirmed that Eridu is among the oldest urban sites in human history. The Sumerians weren't exaggerating. They were remembering. But what they were remembering wasn't the founding of a city by humans. They were remembering something that was already there when humans arrived. The temple at Eridu was dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom, the god of water, the god who gave humanity civilization. The Sumerians didn't claim to have invented writing, agriculture, medicine, or law. They claimed Enki gave these things to them. They claimed he taught them. They claimed he ruled from Eridu before any human king sat on any throne. The throne beneath the temple suggests they were telling the truth. The dimensions are the first evidence. Safar's original measurements, preserved in his field notebooks, describe a seat with a depth of approximately 1.2 meters, nearly 4 feet from front to back. A standard human throne has a seat depth of roughly 50 centimeters. The armrests rose to a height that would place them at shoulder level for a person 6 feet tall. For the throne to be usable, the occupant would need to stand approximately 9 to 10 feet in height. The backrest extended upward another 2 meters above the seat level. If proportional to the occupant, this suggests a seated figure whose head would rise over 4 meters from the chamber floor. These are not ceremonial exaggerations. This is not artistic license. This is engineering. The throne was built to support weight. The chamber was built to accommodate size. The proportions were calculated for function, not symbolism. Someone built a functional seat for a being significantly larger than any human. And they built it beneath the place where the Sumerians would later construct their most sacred temple. The material compounds the mystery. Safar described the throne as basalt or similar. But basalt doesn't occur naturally anywhere near Eridu. The nearest basalt deposits are hundreds of kilometers away in the volcanic regions of what is now Turkey and Syria. Transporting a single block of stone weighing several tons across that distance would have been an extraordinary undertaking, even for later Mesopotamian civilizations with established trade networks and labor organizations. For a pre-Sumerian culture, a culture that supposedly left no other trace at the site, it would have been virtually impossible, unless the culture that built the throne wasn't primitive at all. Unless they possess capabilities that the archaeological record doesn't acknowledge. Unless the throne wasn't transported to Eridu but Eridu was founded specifically because the throne was already there. The inscriptions are what the official reports don't mention. According to sources who have seen Safar's unpublished notes, the throne wasn't blank. Its surface bore carved symbols, not Sumerian cuneiform, not any proto-writing system that preceded it, but something else entirely. The symbols have never been photographed publicly. They have never been studied by outside researchers. They exist only in Safar's descriptions and in whatever documentation remains in the Iraqi archives. What Safar wrote about the symbols is fragmentary. His notes describe repeated patterns suggesting numerical or astronomical content. They describe figures that may represent beings or may represent something else. I cannot determine which. They describe a feeling when viewing them of looking at something that was not meant for human interpretation. Not meant for human interpretation. Safar was a rigorous scientist. He didn't engage in mysticism. He didn't speculate beyond his evidence. For him to write something like that suggests he encountered something genuinely outside his framework. The symbols were carved by someone. They meant something. They communicated information. But to whom? About what? And why would they be inscribed on a throne buried beneath the first city in human history? The ceiling of the chamber tells its own story. The chamber wasn't simply buried by accumulated sediment over millennia. It was deliberately sealed. Above the throne room, Safar found a layer of carefully fitted stone blocks. Not random debris, not collapse from a structure above. Intentional closure. Someone, at some point in prehistory, decided that this chamber should not be accessible. They sealed it with precision. They covered it with layers of fill. They built the first temple directly above it, and they never recorded what they had hidden. Or if they did record it, that record has never been found. The Sumerian texts describe Enki's Abzu, his watery realm beneath the earth from which he ruled, and from which he dispensed wisdom to humanity. The Abzu was described as a chamber, a dwelling place, a throne room beneath the temple. Scholars have always interpreted this as mythology, a poetic description of groundwater, of underground springs, of the life-giving waters that sustained agriculture. But what if the Sumerians were describing something they knew was physically present? What if the Abzu was real? What if the throne of Enki wasn't a metaphor, but an actual seat, buried beneath the temple they built to honor whoever had once occupied it? The 1949 discovery was never fully published. Safar's preliminary reports mention the subterranean chamber. They mention the unusual find. They mention that further study was warranted. That study never happened. In 1958, Iraq's monarchy was overthrown. The revolution disrupted every institutional structure in the country, including archaeological administration. Projects were suspended. Records were scattered. International collaborations were severed. The Eridu excavations were never resumed at the same depth. Later campaigns at the site focused on the temple layers above, the parts of Eridu that fit the conventional narrative, that could be published without complications, that didn't raise questions nobody wanted to answer. The chamber beneath the first city remains sealed. The throne remains unstudied. The symbols remain unread. The proportions recur throughout Sumerian art. This is the detail that convinced me the throne is real. Sumerian cylinder seals, small carved stones used to roll impressions onto clay, frequently depict what scholars call the seated god. A figure on a throne surrounded by smaller figures who are clearly human. The proportional difference between the seated figure and the humans is consistent across thousands of seals spanning more than a millennium. The seated figure is always larger. always, not slightly larger, as a king might be depicted to show importance, dramatically larger, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times the size of the humans in the same scene. Art historians interpret this as hierarchical scaling, a convention where more important figures are shown larger to indicate their status. But what if it's not convention? What if the Sumerian artists were depicting what their ancestors had actually seen? What if the seated god in all those cylinder seals is a cultural memory of someone who actually sat on a throne at Eridu, someone whose actual physical size required a seat with 4-foot depth and armrests at shoulder height? The throne measurements match the artistic proportions, the depictions match the engineering, the mythology matches the archaeology. Everything aligns, if you're willing to see it. The Sumerian king list begins at Eridu. After kingship had descended from heaven, Eridu became the seat of kingship. The first king listed is Alulim, who supposedly reigned for 28,800 years. Scholars dismiss these numbers as mythological, exaggerations, symbolic figures, errors in transmission. But the king list doesn't present itself as mythology. It presents itself as history. It lists kings, reign lengths, and cities in chronological order. It distinguishes between pre-flood and post-flood rulers. It records the succession of power across generations. The later portions of the king list have been verified by archaeology. The kings listed for the historical period are real. Their reigns are documented by contemporary inscriptions. Why would the Sumerians maintain an accurate historical record for their later kings and a fabricated one for their earliest? Unless it wasn't fabricated. Unless the pre-flood kings were real, different, longer-lived, larger in stature, but real. Unless Alulim sat on the throne at Eridu and the throne was sized to fit him. The connection to Enki is explicit in the texts. Enki didn't just live at Eridu. According to Sumerian literature, he built it. He designed the temple. He established the rituals. He trained the first priests. He also created humanity. The Sumerian creation myths describe Enki mixing clay with the blood of a slain god to produce human beings. We were made, according to these texts, to serve the gods, to work, to build, to tend the earth so that the gods wouldn't have to. This sounds like mythology. It reads like mythology, but it also sounds like something else. It sounds like genetic engineering, described in the only language available to people who had no concept of DNA or cellular biology. It sounds like the creation of a worker species by a more advanced one. It sounds like the kind of project that would require administrative infrastructure, temples, priests, throne rooms. The kind of project that would leave behind exactly the archaeological record we find at Eridu. I'm not claiming this is true. I'm claiming the evidence is consistent with it. And I'm claiming that a throne sized for a 9-foot being, buried beneath the temple dedicated to the god who supposedly created humanity, deserves more investigation than it has received. The Iraqi National Museum holds materials that have never been displayed. This is documented. It's not speculation. The museum's collection vastly exceeds its display capacity. Hundreds of thousands of objects sit in storage, catalogued but unstudied. Some have been in storage since the museum's founding. Some haven't been examined since their original excavation. Safar's finds from Eridu are listed in the museum's inventory. The throne is described in catalogue entries that researchers have seen, but access to the actual object has been restricted for decades. The official explanation is conservation concerns. The object is fragile. It requires special handling. It's not suitable for public display. Maybe that's true. But the throne is described as carved from solid basalt, one of the hardest, most durable stones known. Basalt doesn't require special conservation. Basalt survives millennia of exposure without degradation. The Rosetta Stone is basalt. It's been on continuous public display for over 200 years. So why is Enki's throne kept in a secured storage area that no outside researcher has accessed since 1958? What are they protecting? And from whom? The excavation records end abruptly. Safar's field notebooks, the ones that survive, stop mid-entry on the day the chamber was fully cleared. The final page describes the throne's dimensions, notes the symbols on its surface, mentions that photographs were taken and samples were collected. The next notebook in the sequence doesn't exist. The photographs have never been located. The samples have never been analysed. The documentation that should exist simply doesn't. Something happened between that final field entry and the official preliminary report. Something caused the detailed investigation to stop. Something caused the records to disappear. I don't know what that something was, but I know that incomplete records don't happen by accident, not at professionally run excavations, not when the find is significant enough to warrant detailed documentation. Records disappear because someone decides they should disappear. The throne of Enki was found beneath the first city in human history. It was photographed, measured, and described. And then the evidence was buried almost as thoroughly as the throne itself had been. This concludes the documentary, but the investigation has only just begun. The throne exists. The records confirm it. The dimensions suggest something extraordinary. The location, beneath the first city, beneath the temple of the god who gave humanity civilization, raises questions that conventional archaeology has never answered. Who built a seat designed for a 9-foot being before the first human settlement at Eridu? What do the symbols on its surface say? Why was it sealed beneath the temple that would be rebuilt 18 times across 3,000 years? And why, after its discovery in 1949, did every attempt to study it simply stop? The chamber is still sealed. The throne is still in storage. The answers are still waiting. Something out of place, something out of time. The first city was built to cover something older. The first temple was built to honor someone larger than human. The first throne was already there when humanity arrived. And someone decided, a long time ago, that we weren't supposed to know. This documentary presents historical analysis and alternative interpretation for educational discussion. The claims regarding the Eridu excavations are based on documented archaeological records combined with speculative frameworks regarding pre-Sumerian occupation. Further research is encouraged.